Hey friends, welcome to the Publish, Promote, Profit podcast. I'm Rob Kosberg, and every week I show you how to use a best-selling book to grow your income and your impact. And if you're interested in having your own best-selling book, I recorded a short video explaining our trademark process at beginmybook.com. All right. Hey, welcome everybody. It's Rob here with another episode of our Publish, Promote, Profit podcast. Excited to be with you. Got a great guest. Jason Lauritsen is transforming management as a keynote speaker, trainer, and author. He's the best-selling author of 2 books you can see behind him: Unlocking High Performance, How to Use Performance Management to Engage and Empower Employees to Reach Their Full Potential, and Social Gravity, Harnessing the Natural Laws of Relationships. Jason liberates managers from outdated and inhumane practices. I've got to hear about the inhumane practices so they can cultivate human potential at work and improve people's lives. Jason, good to have you here, my friend. Looking forward to a good conversation.
Thanks for having me, Rob.
Tell me, like in a nutshell, who you serve, what you do, like what your magic is. Obviously, I explained your bio, but give us maybe in layman's terms who you work with and what your magic is to help them.
Sure. Well, I would say, the most fundamental thing that I do, I think, is help managers understand that a lot of what they've been taught about how to get the best out of their people is nonsense, and that there is a way that is much more human to approach it. And it's really based most fundamentally in relationships. It's based in fostering better relationships. It's based in having a deeper understanding of what people really need to be whole and to be successful, and then giving that to them. And so that is, I think, tactically what I do. And I would say, my Don Quixote kind of tilting at windmills thing is, I'm trying to make work suck less for people. Like, I really believe that work doesn't have to be dreadful. It doesn't have to be a burden. It shouldn't be something that wears you down. It should be something that lifts you up and energizes you and gives you meaning and purpose. And so that's kind of my big vision for my work.
That's awesome. Well explained. Thank you. Can you differentiate for me inhumane practices versus more human type practices? Like, are there some categories or a way that can be described?
Well, I think clearly, Rob, you're an entrepreneur probably, so you haven't worked for anyone in a while, I would guess, which is why you're puzzled by that. I
am unemployable, no question.
As am I, and which is one of the ironies of my work, that I help other people learn how to be better employers, and I'm unemployable. But I think people that are living in it or have been in it, the inhumane piece of it is just treating people like a means or a mechanism of production, right? That's traditionally how work was structured. That's what I write about in Unlocking High Performance. I start with kind of the first couple chapters are about how did we end up with such a messed up system of work? And it was largely because in the early days when management was created back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, when we were industrializing the Western world, we needed to get people to behave like machines for long periods of time. And so management was literally designed to get human beings to behave like machines, right, to produce output. And that system of management has basically perpetuated. And so we treat people like equipment. We treat people, we manage people like we're enforcing a contract. That is inhumane. What is humane or human is treating people as if, sort of operating with the assumption that everybody wakes up in the morning and wants to be successful and well and happy. Everybody has that natural motivation and capability to be successful when they are presented with the opportunity and the means to do so. And so our job is to recognize and treat them as unique, talented, gifted human beings with potential to be unleashed, right? And to assume and not assume that they don't want to or that they can't or whatever. So that's the fundamental difference, is really in how we show up and think about people at work.
That's good. That's really helpful. I would assume, you probably know these statistics a lot better than me, but I would assume that some of this has also grown out of a need within corporations and businesses because, well, in the past, our fathers and grandfathers worked at a company for 35 or 40 years, perhaps being treated like a machine and maybe acting like that machine. But it certainly seems like more recent generations, it's more transient, right? People aren't staying at jobs for 35 or 40 years. I guess they're seeking fulfillment. They're seeking something more than just the monetary exchange. So is this an outcropping of like, wow, we've got to get our stuff together as a business because this isn't working for this generation?
Yes. And actually it's being amplified, in this moment, right? There's the conversation about the Great Resignation. The pandemic actually took what you just described, and if that was kind of some embers or some sparks that were out there and threw a bucket of gasoline on it. And now we have this fire that's burning of people being like, no more. I'm not doing this. I'm not okay with being treated like this. But I think also work has changed, right? 50, 60, 70 years ago, a lot of the means of production, the things we did is we sat and we ran machines, or we mechanically, we were doing rote kind of mechanical tasks, and it was based on using our muscles and using repetitive motion. Whereas today we need people's ingenuity and creativity. We live in an innovation and information economy. And so people are still a means to creating work product, but we're more dependent on the innate capabilities of human beings, sort of the really messy, complicated, beautiful stuff that we didn't want. Like before, that was a bug in the system back in the old days. Yeah. Whereas today, it's actually what we need. And so I think it's both. It's people are expecting something different, and work needs something different. The kind of businesses we're in require something different. So it's both. Yeah,
I had an interesting conversation with my middle son. He's 27. He works for JPL, NASA. And he was asking me what I thought of this Antiwork movement. We had a long conversation about that. And, I know a little bit of it, probably not enough to have a inspired conversation on it, but he and I certainly had a good conversation. I do believe that people are built, again, I have anecdotal evidence of this, but I do believe that there's a desire for us to be productive. Like in an individual, I think we want to produce something. We want to do something that lasts, that gives us inspiration, et cetera. And there must be this tremendous frustration with people that are kind of throwing their hands up in the air, especially after the pandemic, and are like, hey, I'm just going to find a way not to work at all. Are you seeing any of that in the corporations, the companies that you mentor, that you coach, et cetera?
What's interesting about the anti-work movement is that I think if you dig in on that a little bit, what you find, at least I think, what I've seen, and I am no expert in that, so I don't want to speak for them, but I think what it feels to me they're saying isn't necessarily anti-work, but it's anti the way we work or the way we have been working. It's like anti being treated like I'm disposable, anti not being valued, anti, being mistreated, like all of those things. So I think you're right. And I think a lot of organizations are realizing they're starting to wake up to the reality that people, they want to do meaningful work. But I think also underneath that is one of the challenges, and it's a reckoning that's starting to happen finally, is also a lot of people have been working for less than a living wage, less than. They're not only showing up being treated like a piece of machinery to produce work output, but they're not even being paid enough to take care of their most basic needs. And so now they're working two jobs, and so like there's so much about what's happening right now, which is just a long overdue reckoning. And I think it's really a reorientation or reinvention of work that it's needed. I mean, COVID's done a lot of terrible things, but what's happening to the workplace, in my opinion, is a really positive disruption that we're seeing.
Yeah, I guess it's not anti-work, it's anti the work that's available, right? That's right. In some ways, it's, because of the pay, because of the conditions, because of the job that I'm being offered that doesn't give me inspiration anyway, why don't I just find something else to do?
That's right.
Yeah, makes total sense to me. tell me about, from the standpoint of, what you do and how you help and serve others. I'm sure you've come into some very ugly situations. I won't ask for specifics, although that might be kind of fun to hear. But tell me what you see when you go into a company, and obviously no names, and how you go about, are there 5 steps? Are there, things
Sure.
that you're in particular looking for and diagnosing? What does that look like? How does that work?
So what I'll tell you is that my business is like one of the things that has, the longer you're in business for yourself, and I'm sure this is true for you, I think it's true for all entrepreneurs, is that you get clear on who you're best suited to serve. And one of the things that I've realized is I'm not interested in as a practice, I'm not interested in helping fix broken companies where, I just don't have the patience to teach leaders things or people things that should be intuitively obvious to them.
Yeah.
This is just a bias
being.
I've learned as
Right.
a human. I'm like, I shouldn't have to come in and tell you that it's best practice to be kind to your people or to value them.
You suck as a person, so I don't know that this is outside my scope of work.
Like everything I say to you is going to hurt and be offensive. So probably we should just part ways now.
Right.
And so my clients tend to be organizations that have already kind of had the awakening. Like they've realized like, okay, we know there's a different way. We know that we need to retool how we work, but we don't know how. We need help. And then usually my intervention today is helping retool their managers with a different mindset and a different set of skills for how they show up for their people. Nice. So that's generally where I'm at. So I'm kind of like I'm more of a guide to help you find your way to the promised land once you've decided you want to get there. I'm not going to show up and try to convince you to go. Right.
Yeah.
I do that in some of my writing and thought leadership, but that's not the work that I do at an organizational level.
Got it. And as things are progressing, are there like key performance indicators or metrics that you're looking at? Are employees surveyed about their happiness, or like how do we know, that there's progress being made? And, besides looking way down the road and seeing a happy, healthy company.
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, I think there's a balance, and this is in my work, a lot of people that do my work, I think get tilted a little bit too far out of balance towards things like just measuring sentiment or just like, are all of our employees happy? It's like, well, it's important to have happy employees. Yeah, sure. We want happy employees, but how are they performing as an individual? Because what we want is happy, productive employees.
Right.
That's at the end of the day. So I would say when you're thinking about metrics, there's a balance. Like a well-run organization has clear metrics and measures around how do we measure, how do we manage individual, team, and organizational performance. And at the same time, we're also measuring individual sentiment. We're measuring things like, how do people feel about the work experience? Does it align with what they need? Are they getting the things they need to be productive? There's measures around well-being. I think also generally retention is a pretty strong, that's where the rubber meets the road often. If people are sticking around or leaving, that's as sort of loud a signal as you can get. But I would say there's got to be balance, right? You want a balance between surveys and other measures of sentiment from the employee, like how are they feeling about their job? How do they perceive that they're getting what they need? Are they satisfied? Balanced against performing. Yeah. Right. Those two things have to coexist. And sometimes I think a lot of organizations are out of balance one way or the other. And when you balance both is when that's the sweet spot. That's good.
That's good. I'm sure some business owners take a sigh of relief hearing some of that, right? I mean, there are both are certainly important. I guess some employees just aren't happy people, right? Just like some managers aren't happy people and don't have, as the water boy would say, the social skills necessary to often perform their duties, right? What is it, the Peter principle or the Matthew principle of which one is it? Being advanced beyond your level of...
Peter, I think that's a Peter principle. You sort of rise to your level of incompetence or something.
Right.
It's
I'm mixing up disciples, so... Yeah.
No, that's right. No, I think that's true. I think It's one of my pet peeves is that, and I have to be careful about how I talk about this because it's not wrong to want your employees to be happy. Like we want people to be happy, but at the same token, happy isn't the outcome that we're after solely. Like the organization exists to perform.
Right.
Because if we're not producing the outcome that our clients need from us or that our customers want, then we have no reason to exist as an organization.
Right.
Hence, no jobs, no pay, no nothing. And so performance is the imperative. And so everything exists to support performance. But there are different ways to get there. That's the humane, inhumane differentiation. What kind of organization do you want to run? And on some level, what I'm preaching is an ideology. And even deeper than that, it's a moral ideology on some level. It's like, what kind of leader do you want to be? What kind of organization do you want to be? What kind of impact do you want to have on people and society and communities? Because when work works well for people, when it's the kind of experience I described earlier that I'm trying to create, means better people that are healthier people that can then they take that back to their families, to their communities. It's a ripple effect that makes the world better. Like work can change the world when work's working well, but you got to make that decision as a leader.
Yeah.
Like what kind of impact are you having on people? Because you can get to performance a lot of different ways.
Yeah. That's good. Really, really good. Let's switch gears for just a moment. You have two books. One seems to be more targeted than the other, Social Gravity, Unlocking High Performance. Talk to me about the differences of those two books. I know, and the similarities. I know that there are threads of similarities having to do with relationships, et cetera, but tell me about the differences of those two books, who they're for, et cetera.
Sure. Well, Social Gravity, I mean, there was a lot of years between the two books. And so, Social Gravity was conceived of and written, published clear back in 2012, I guess, early 2012. And I mean, that's what you would describe more. It's more of a self-help book. It's a how-to book for people to understand why relationships matter, how they matter, and then how to build the kind of relationships and network you need to succeed in your life, whatever that means to you. And Unlocking High Performance was more of a book for organizational leaders and human resources leaders as kind of a blueprint for how to design an organizational kind of management process to unlock the potential and performance of their people in a way that felt good to people and produced results. And so the theme is relationships. Relationships is at the heart of all of my work, but they're very different. They're very different books. There's, 8, 9, 10 years difference between the writing of those two books. So I was a very different person and a very different professional between the two as well. And frankly, even the way that they got written, the way they got published is very different. And so they're two very different things, but that's who they're for. Gotcha.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I would say your Unlocking High Performance is probably it's certainly your more recent book, but it's probably the book that is also maybe a little bit more targeted towards your ideal client and using it to grow your business. Is that accurate?
That's true.
Along those lines, it's interesting how the way you just described it, I'll tell you what I see all the time, and we've done over 1,100 books for our clients in the last 10 years. And I have this conversation over and over and over again. Client will come to me. They want to write their first book. They always want to go broad with their first book. They want to write a book to reach as big a population as possible. They want to write, a great fill in the blank book. I always try to direct them. No. Look, that can be your second, your third, your fourth, whatever. Your first book really needs to be targeted, ultra targeted to your ideal client, using it to get what it is you want. Speaking engagements, more customers, use it in a book funnel, et cetera, et cetera. Is that like, whether you got advice or not, was that kind of the experience that you went through as well, in writing your first book versus your second book? Just wondering.
I would say that I've learned that lesson more broadly through my business than through my books. The book, and I know this is kind of sacrilegious probably in your business as people listen to this, but like I didn't write either of my books really to sell books.
Yeah.
And because of that, I don't think I made wise choices about if I were sitting down today, if you and I were sitting down to write, talk about, let's write a book, or I'm going to write a book and you're going to help me, I get like today, I would be like, okay, here's who we're going to write to, because I've gotten that clarity in all the rest of my business.
Right.
But, the first book was really, Joe and I had been really active young professionals. And so when we wrote that book, it was kind of a culmination of what we had learned, and we had this curiosity about what had happened and why it had happened for us. And so we kind of wrote it. And so it's a book that I would say it speaks to everyone, but it was really calibrated that way. But it was just sort of happened. It was just us being reflected in the book.
Right.
Unlocking High Performance is kind of it was basically a download of like, here's everything I've learned, or here's the most important things I've learned over the last 20 years of journey doing this work. And so it is not as narrow as it should be, but it certainly, I had some in mind, some sense of who it was for. But I would say that, I worked with a publisher on that book, and their goals weren't as niched as they probably should have been. They could have been, but it could have been a lot more niched. I think in hindsight, if I would have narrowed the focus and been more specific, we probably would have sold a lot more books.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. It's not heresy. In my Bible, that's canon, if you know what I mean. That's what we talk to our clients about. We're not trying to write, the next War and Peace. We're not trying to write something that's going to sell 1 million copies or maybe even 100,000 copies. Obviously, we have clients that have done that. But ideally, we're trying to write something that if it sold 10,000 copies, it will mean millions of dollars in revenue and thousands of lives impacted. And,
right.
You can always go broad. If you start broad, well, let's put it this way. I've seen this a lot with my clients. The ones that start broad almost never make the kind of impact that they would have made had they started narrow. And
that's right.
And it's a shame because, they just believe the opposite. And maybe if those that are listening today, because they've heard it from me over and over and over again, maybe hearing it from you, they'll believe it more. You know how that is. But, the more narrow you can be, especially with your first book or second book, the more income and the more impact you're really going to make. And so thank you for iterating that. That's, I think, really helpful for people.
It's true that's a marketing idiom, right? It is true of all marketing.
It is.
That the more specific you get, the more focused you are on who you serve, and the more you can speak to them directly about whatever it is they care about and are trying to solve. Like when you see a book and you go, that looks like it's like it was written for me, you're obviously going to buy that book. And it's so counterintuitive, though. That's one of the hardest lessons to learn as an entrepreneur, as an author, as whatever, because you think the broader it is, the more people can find it, the more people it can impact. And that is the complete, if it's written for everyone, then it's speaking to no one.
Yep. It's just more noise. Just more noise in the marketplace. The only way to cut through the noise is to address somebody really specifically. And then they take notice. They're like, oh, okay, that is speaking to me. All this other stuff is speaking to everybody else, so that doesn't apply to me. So really good.
Absolutely right.
Talk to me about your books. We've gone into the pragmatism of writing a book. I always like to find out from the guests that I have, how are you using your book to get more of what it is you want? More clients, more speaking engagements, more PR and media, et cetera. And any stories around that, whether it's social gravity, but probably more the recent book, Unlocking High Performance. How are you using that to land more customers?
Well, for me, a lot of it is, I describe my business as a thought leadership business. So thought leadership depends on perceived or real credibility, right? Social proof. And so, if you're listening to this as a podcast, you can't see, but behind me on my bookshelf, I practice full bookshelf credibility. This is one of my settings. I have both of my books prominently facing behind me so that people understand, this is a person who has written books. And for whatever reason, that's why people are listening to this. That's why your business exists.
Yep.
People assume if you've written a book that you must know what you're talking about, which is not indeed true. It just means you can put a lot of words on paper, but there's an assumption, and that's helpful. And so for me, the way that I use my book is more so I use it probably more so as a mechanism, as social proof that I know what I'm talking about. I use it for, I use it all the time. I get paid to create thought leadership constantly. And so people are always like, author of, right? And then my book is always visible in different things. And it's always, we're referencing back to it. I use it to speak, to drive speaking opportunities. I have had people that, find the book, read the book, and reach out and say, hey, we'd like to talk to you. And I've had clients that'll find the book, read the book, reach out, and just want to hire me to help advise them about working through a project or something like that.
Those are great phone calls, aren't they?
Oh my God, they're the best. They're the best. You're like, okay, all of that blood, sweat, and tears is now paying off. And so I would say that historically is how I used. What I would say, and the caveat, and this is one thing I always tell people is, and I think your business is designed to help people with this, as I understand it. We self-published our first book. So Social Gravity was self-published. Unlocking High Performance, I went through a traditional publisher route. Partly the reason I did that was because of the whole social proof thing, right? If someone else is willing to publish your words, that's even more valuable sometimes. So I wanted to do both. But what I would say is that the first book was infinitely more valuable because in that case, like I could send, I could buy my own books inexpensively and I could give them out. I could send them. I could gift them. I used that book like crazy for years to do business development, to be generous with people, I did that all the time because I could. I can't afford to use this book. Like it costs me so much money to buy it that I can't afford to give it away in mass. And so I can give away one or two here and there, but like I can't send a team 30 copies because that's going to break the bank. And so, or what, you know what I mean? Like I could, but I'm not going to. Yeah. And so I think it's really important to know what you want your book to do when you're making decisions about how you're going to write it, how you're going to publish it, and all of that, because it has real consequences in the way that you can leverage it in your business. At least that's been my experience.
No, that's really good. We do a number of things for clients. One of the things that we do, maybe not as publicly, is we help clients build book funnels. For my book, which is a Wall Street Journal bestseller, it's published through my company, so I own 100% rights, royalties, and control. And so we run book funnels, and it cost me, a couple bucks to print it. And so, I can offer the book free and just pay shipping, $7.95. And in essence, I can ship it, fulfill it, and print it all for less than $7.95 because I'm not having to pay retail or an inflated wholesale number through a publisher. And people will come to us and say, I love your book funnel and I know what your numbers are, stats. We've sold tens of thousands of books through my book funnel and millions of dollars in revenue. And they'll say, can you do that? And one of the first questions I ask is, who owns the rights to your book? Right. Do you own it or does the publisher own it? And if they ever say publisher, the first question after that then is, okay, what does it cost for you to buy your book? And often it's 10, 12, 15 bucks to buy a book. And I'm like, it probably won't work for you because
that's right.
It's now become, too much of a loss on the front end to print, get those books. And so it's well said, I guess, is that story is just leading up to.
That's right. Well, and like I said, just being clear about my motivations with, I'm grateful that I have this book. And part of the reason I have this book is because I was approached by a publisher and they were soliciting books and I'd been thinking about writing another one. And so I knew going into it, I'm not going to get rich on this book. I knew all the downsides to it, but the reason I did it was twofold. I signed a contract because number one, I knew that deadline would mean I'm actually going to get a book written because I have to. Yeah. And number two, I wanted the social proof of that imprint on my book. Other than that, there was self-publishing was better in every possible single way other than those two things. And you could create your own deadlines. You don't have to sign a contract to do that. That was just, for me at the time, it made sense.
That is helpful, though. Putting your feet to the fire is helpful.
It does. It helps. Having someone do that, it does help. And it worked for me. But I think most of the time, it just doesn't make sense because the other thing, most authors learn the hard way is, my eyes were very open going into it, is your publisher, depending on the situation, but most of the time your publisher is going to do nothing to market your book.
Yeah.
So if you want to sell you're going to have to sell your book, and they're going to make all the money.
That's right.
So just be aware that that's what you're getting into. I knew up front that was the situation. But like I said, it served my purpose at the time. I don't regret it at all, but I wouldn't do it again.
Yeah, most traditional publishing contracts and agreements are crappy employment contracts. You're basically getting a small check. Oftentimes it's a very small check. And sometimes it's just services. We'll edit your book, et cetera.
Yep.
In exchange for you going out there and hustling.
That's right.
Going out there and selling it. It just sounds terrible.
Yeah, it's not a great business. And that's, I had just somebody again the other day, I was talking, they were like, well, they've been shopping their book, going the traditional route, agent, talking to publishers. And they're like, well, apparently I don't have enough Twitter followers, or I don't have enough whatever. And I'm just like, now they don't really care about the content of your book. What they care about is, do you look like someone who can sell enough books for them to profit off of it? And it's a marketing game. And so it's really, you got to really want to do it for the right reasons. And you got to have people that can help you. If you're going to use it to accelerate your business, you've got to be smart, and you've got to know what you're doing, and you got to be focused.
Love it. Love it. Well, look, you heard this from Jason, not from me. People will say, well, Rob, of course you're going to say that because that's your business. And I'm like, you got me. It is. But I'm telling the truth here. So now you've heard it from Jason, not from me.
True.
So good.
And I'm not even a client, and I'm still telling you this is true. So
I love it. I love it. Jason, great conversation. Really appreciated, the candid nature of it and the things that you shared. Where can we direct people to get your books, learn more about what you do for business owners that are watching and or listening? Where can we send them?
Sure. Well, the two best places to find me are my website, which is jasonlauritsen.com. You can find kind of all my stuff there, management training, the books, the speaking, or I'm really active on LinkedIn. Okay. So if you can spell my last name, you're going to find me, because I'm all, just type my name into the Googles and it'll give you a whole bunch of ways to get a hold of me. I try to be very easy to find. So That's where you can find me.
And Lauritsen is spelled Lauritsen.
Correct.
Awesome. Great. Jason, thanks so much. Thanks for being on the Publish, Promote, Profit podcast. Great to have you on, my friend.
Thanks, Rob. Take care.
You too. Hey, thanks for listening in on the Publish, Promote, Profit podcast. If you enjoyed it, please take a minute and like and subscribe to the podcast, because every week I bring you either great guests or great teaching to help you to grow your income and your impact with a best-selling book. And if you're interested in having your own best-selling book, check out my short video which explains our trademark process at beginmybook.com.